I have to confess at the start of this session that I'm quite fond of the Senate. I'm sure it's not a popular view amongst government or business who want done what they want done when they want it done. But when it functions as it was intended, although not as a States House because that ship sailed quite a long time ago, but when it's functioning as a House of Review, the Senate has a great capacity to knock the rough edges off government policy and produce a better outcome for the people who elected all of them. And what will be in another unpopular admission, I have to say I'm quite fond of crossbenchers because of two interrelated reasons. They have an ability to go beyond the views or the confines of the major parties, and they can represent some views that either get lost in the major party process or don't get heard at all. From the larger of the crossbench parties, the Democrats, now the Greens, to the very small, think Ricky Muir, David Leyonhjelm or Nick Xenophon before he had to move to a bigger room for his party meetings than a phone box, they can bring different and often ignored experiences and views into Canberra from the real world or into the Parliament. One of the examples is and they can be helpful. One of the examples is the Democrats, when they were at the height of their balance of powers, they knocked the rough edges off the GST, off other taxation and Medicare changes in the Labor budget in the early 90s, and worked with the Howard government on 171 amendments, and I thank the Parliamentary Library for that bit of research, to pass the Workplace Relations Bill of 96. But there were other times when the government could rely on a single vote. It got the WIC legislation through with the vote of Senator Harradine. Fast forward to 2004, when the Howard government won a Senate majority and passed work choices. Imagine what a different bill that would have been if it had to negotiate that through a crossbench, through a Senate where it wasn't in the majority. It would have likely been a bill that was more acceptable to the public and less easier to run a scare campaign against. In the end, what happened is work choices helped propel Kevin Rudd into government, and the industrial relations laws were then taken back to the rules that existed before Paul Keating's changes. The Senate crossbench was much maligned by Labor and the coalition governments at the time, and I'll refer to some Parliamentary Library research again. For 11 years, only 45 of 2,066 government bills were rejected by the non-government parties. They helped get better government legislation through almost all the time, even if it came at an electoral cost for them. Today, and the senators at the table may disagree with me, but I think the story is slightly different. In the last few years, even before 2016, the governments have had a more complex mix of crossbenchers to deal with, and it seems to me that the parties that now come into the Parliament, they don't come in to review and improve legislation, but come in with their own mandate that they want to enact, whether that be by knocking back legislation that disagrees with their position or insisting on deals and horse trading, for example, spending $40 million on bike paths for the Labor Party to get the vote on the second stimulus package. There's nothing wrong with this. Parties are elected for the most part on their policies, although sometimes the minor parties are elected because of, in the past, preference deals or sometimes name recognition. Rarely is their mandate, their policy platform, as wide as the major parties. And I think that the minor parties and crossbenchers, where they may have been from relatively in the centre of government, like the Democrats were, may tend now to come more from the edges of the political spectrum. It's a sign of the fracturing in support for the major parties, something Labor's been dealing with for quite some time now, with the Greens and the Coalition occasionally during the Howard years, and now with One Nation, and with Senator Bernardi's Australian Conservatives. The complexity of the Senate after the 2016 double dissolution has made things harder for the government, and the complexity within that crossbench group has made for even more uncertainty. One Nation has fractured a little bit, but been put back together with the assistance of the High Court. The Liberals have lost Senator Bernardi to a new party, which swallowed up Family First, although not the new Senator Lucy Gachui, who's an independent for the time being. The magic number the government needs for votes is 39. It needs that to pass legislation. If the Labor or Greens oppose anything, it needs 10 of 12 crossbenchers. It needs both One Nation and Nick Xenophon's team, and even if it gets the Greens, it now needs one extra vote. It's a tough task, but it's not impossible. It's made the job more difficult in an age when politicians shy away from anything controversial, maybe reform shy and risk averse. Governments these days will often shelve a controversial proposal long before it gets to the vote. But there are more reasons for that. The poll-driven politics, the media operating at a faster pace, and a media that needs to encourage news stories to buy don't help. But it shouldn't be impossible, and just because it's hard isn't a good enough reason to try. The government will be trying over the next few weeks to get its budget through, so we will take a look at that now with our panel, Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm, Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, and the leader of the Xenophon team, Xenophon. Welcome to you all. I'll kick off this discussion with the question of why are you here? Is it that people are discontented with the major parties? Is it that the major parties are not what they're looking for, or is there another reason? Senator Leyonhjelm.
Well, if you look at voting patterns, the share of the minor parties or the non-major parties, and I include the Greens in the major parties, so the share of the non-major party vote in the Senate has been increasing since 2007. It's now up to about 30%, that if you judge, people's attitudes based on the way they vote, it would appear that they are unhappy with what they're getting with the major parties. So I think the fact that there is a substantial crossbench is a reflection of that discontent. And as long as people remain discontented with Labor, Liberal and to some extent Greens, although the Greens would argue about that, then the minor...
We will argue about that.
Yeah, the minor party vote will remain substantial.
I think there's probably a combination of things going on here. David's right that across the board the support for major parties is falling away. I mean, it's now roughly a third of the Australian electorate that votes for somebody other than Labor or Liberal. And Nick and I from South Australia, I guess it's we started the trend, I reckon, Nick. There's like this kind of view that when we were both first elected in 2007, there was out of 6 senators, 2 Labor, 2 Liberal, and then Nick, Xenophon and I. So it was kind of, I don't feel like it's not normal. I think it's actually very normal. And I'm quite supportive of the idea that we have more and more voices in the Senate. You mentioned in your opening remarks around the Senate not being the States House. Well, I think we all still come with a view that we do have to represent our home electorates as well, being our states. But I wanted to take issue with the point around wanting to just implement our own policies as opposed to improving and reviewing legislation. I still feel very strongly that that is the primary role of the Senate, and as the Senator, that's my primary focus. If I can get our policies from the Greens' perspective introduced through that process, or policies closer to that, then I will. But our job is to be a check on the executive, and I think we do a pretty good job at it. And the more voices, the better. Australia is, it may seem strange and people want to pretend that this current Senate is something different, but really it was, in the last 30 years, it was that period between 2004 and 2007 that was abnormal, when the coalition controlled both houses. That was strange. What we have now is actually a truer and more pure reflection of what the Constitution actually envisaged.
Lyndal, just picking up on your introduction, you made reference to that period from 2004 to 2007 when work choices went through without any amendment because the government had the numbers, and that was really the seeds of the destruction of the Howard government, because there was such an effective campaign by unions, by many community groups against the government for that. Sometimes the Senate is there to save a government from itself. And I think that shouldn't be forgotten. And also when I'm asked by journalists saying, well, what about the government's mandate, because they've got a majority of seats, or they've got a working majority in the House of Representatives. Well, when we go to the ballot box, when we went to vote on July the 2nd, seems so long ago, July the 2nd last year, we actually get 2 votes. We get the Green House of Reps and the much larger Senate ballot paper. So in effect, there are 2 mandates, and there are hundreds of thousands of Australians who vote differently for the upper house compared to the lower house. They actually want that check and balance, and I know David didn't approve of the Senate changes, but still got in, and I think he gives that strong alternative voice from his Libertarian perspective, and I think that is, we will disagree with each other, but I think it's a good thing to have that alternative voice along with the Greens and with my team from the political centre. Australians understand that they don't want an executive to behave in an unfettered way, and for instance the deal that was done with the Crossbench but not with the Greens in terms of indexation to get through those package of measures, we actually took the rough edges off that. We didn't take away thousands of dollars from single parents, which would have been quite catastrophic in terms of the impact on them and their families. The Senate is there to save a government from itself sometimes.
On that question of understanding, I've had the view for a while, although it changed because of the 2010 election and the House of Reps suddenly found itself in a minority and having to negotiate, that House of Representatives members don't really understand how the Senate works, and I think probably business even less so. When it comes to a government negotiating with you on a piece of legislation, is there a way they can do it more effectively than they currently do?
Less spin, more facts. Be upfront about what it is that they really want to achieve. I think we all take from whatever side of the political spectrum we come from, I think, on the crossbench. I disagree with David on a number of things, but there are other things that I agree with him on, and same with Nick. But I think it's true to say that we all take our role in scrutinising legislation very seriously, and it is different to being a member in the House where you just kind of get told to, the bell's ringing, you get told to sit on that side of the chamber because that's all you can do. In the Senate, you can move amendments, you can actually change the law and improve people's lives, and I think if government and business want to engage with the Senate more effectively, you have to understand that we come from a position where we genuinely love legislating. We actually like the process of reviewing and improving legislation. We're not there just to grandstand. And I think if you come with ideas, if you can come with a genuine perspective of how you can fix something, I think all of us would have our doors open to you.
Can I just say, I think that even though he might sound like the Terminator, Matthias Cormann has been the consummate negotiator. Yeah, it took a while for somebody to get that. Matthias Cormann has been the go-to person in negotiations for the government. I found him quite good to deal with. He's pretty tough to deal with, but I hope I don't damage his reputation by praising him, but he is actually quite good to deal with. I don't know how others find him, but he's a pretty straight shooter. And I think the government has found someone that deals with the tough issues that seem intractable, and he's managed to get some results in respect of that. So I think they've improved. I think the time of the Abbott government, it was kind of take it or leave it. So there has been an improvement, I think, in terms of the tone and the attitude of the government to sit down and talk to the Senate.
Yeah, there has been an improvement, but I hesitate to suggest they're good at it yet. Certainly it was...
You're so harsh, David.
Yeah, and I only have the experience of dealing with a coalition government, so I've never dealt with the Labor in government, but I'm told that in the Gillard period, when the House was a minority government and they had to get the crossbench support to achieve a majority, that the relationships with the crossbenchers in the House was very, very positive and very favourable. I've heard some of them say that. You couldn't say that about the relationships with the crossbench in the Senate. Even now, it still leaves a lot to be desired. Some ministers, and Matthias Cormann, I agree, is a good one. When he has legislation on the go, he'll talk to you, and Michaelia Cash is another one. She'll talk to you, discuss your concerns. You know it's coming. You know why they're trying to do it. You know when they're trying to do it, mostly, except that they're terrible time managers. And so, you know, that works in their favour. There are other ministers, and they're primarily ministers in the House, who will send you an email saying, this is what I want to get through the House. I'd appreciate your support. If you've got any questions, here's the name of my advisor. Please give him a ring. And that doesn't work very well. And some of them just repeat mistakes that have been made and other ministers have learnt not to do, and they just still blunder in and make the same mistakes. In the previous parliament, in the old Senate before the last election, Ricky Muir, for example, hated being lobbied. Absolutely hated being lobbied, and the best way to convince him to support something was to speak to one of his advisors. One day, in fact, he even hid in the toilet so he couldn't be lobbied, so he could get away from being lobbied. And yet, several ministers knew that, knew exactly how to deal with him, and yet others would blunder in and try to lobby him. You know,
not in the toilet, though.
No, not in the toilet. So, you know, sometimes they like dealing with me because I'm very clear about my principles. I say I won't vote for an increase in taxes or reduction in liberty. That's an unshakable pair of rules, and so if they can judge their bill against those two parameters, they know pretty much what my position is. But nevertheless, they still are very different. Some of them are very, very good and maintain a relationship. Others are absolutely purely transactional, and you know jolly well that once they get an outcome, you'll never see them again.
I think that winner-takes-all approach has changed somewhat since the Abbott days, but I would agree with David that there still is an attitude of that, and unless there is an understanding that no, the Senate's job is to look at this, and people expect it. Our voters, the people who vote for us on the crossbench, expect us to take that job seriously, to scrutinise things, and trying to pretend that that is somehow us getting in the way doesn't do anyone any good.
And does the crossbench, do you talk amongst each other very much to try and get a better negotiating strategy when you're talking to the government?
Not exactly that. We have a crossbench meeting room, which for the 12 crossbenchers, not including the Greens, and we do have a scheduled meeting time every sitting week, and most of us either attend or send along staffers, and we do talk about things of interest. But the truth is, we're a pretty diverse group of people. And so Nick has his own party meetings. Pauline has her own party meetings. So there's nothing to be achieved by 12 of us getting together and trying to reach agreement. We tend to see things in different ways anyhow. So we talk about things that you know, we can make progress on, procedural stuff. Things, how the government is dealing with you, have you heard, have you got information, that kind of thing.
If the government's making stuff up, you find out pretty quickly, don't
Yes,
you?
you do.
And Senator Xenophon, do you interact much with your crossbench colleagues?
I think so. I mean, you know, no, don't poke me. No, I mean, it's a very different atmosphere in the Senate compared to the House of Reps. It is much more collegiate. We have to work with each other on committees. I think all of us are on a stack of committees, and David's chairing one on cutting red tape, and Sarah's on a stack of committees, so am I. So you have to work with your colleagues, and the great thing about the Senate process is that we look at issues, if it's a references committee, or look at legislation and try and dissect it, and do what the Senate is meant to do, to review legislation or to look at some of the big issues which ordinarily would not be looked at in the same way by the House of Reps, where it's incredibly partisan.
We'll go now to some tin tax. We've had government ministers speaking this morning about what they want to do, and the Treasurer about his budget. He has to get that run past you guys to see if you like it or not. So I just wanted to take your temperature on a few issues. First of all, what's being called Gonski 2.0, the government's school funding. Senator Hanson-Young, the Greens were initially seemed supportive, but you now say there needs to be more money. Where do you think you'll land on that?
Look, I actually don't. I know that's the way it's being presented, but I don't actually think we've changed our position at all. What we said right from the word go was we know that the current situation with the education funding isn't a long-term solution. It's not. There is a funding cliff at the end of this year because the government, under Tony Abbott, disgracefully decided to rip the years 5 and 6 of Gonski out from that money out from promised agreements to states. So there's been a funding cliff sitting there for the last 4 years. We are very concerned about that, but we also want to make sure we've got a genuine needs-based funding model that is funded. And the current legislation tabled by the government, there are some improvements to the status quo, but it doesn't go anywhere near what David Gonski originally envisaged. So yes, we want more money, but really, Lyndal, how do we justify to kids in poor schools that they've got to wait 10 years before their schools get to that standard? That to me is madness. If this is about trying to fix and lift the level of education in our country, waiting 10 years, most of these kids in our current system are going to have finished school by then, and we've just absolutely wasted a generation of lifting educational standards, particularly in our public schools. You know, that's where the bulk of our kids get educated. So I'm here on a break from Senate estimates where we're currently drilling the Education Department to try and get down to the detail of the package. But we need more money, we need a better time frame, but we also need the states brought into this process. The federal government can set whatever rules it wants, but unless the states follow through, then we're going to see rich schools who continue to get more money and poor schools who get left behind, and I'm just not prepared to sign off on that.
Senator Xenophon.
Well, can I just say, Rebecca Sharkey, my colleague the member for Mayo, our colleague in the lower house, voted for the package, but with reservations, saying that there ought to be further improvements, subject to the Senate inquiry process and subject to further negotiations. I agree that you ought to bring forward the funding package. At the moment it's 10 years. I think 8 years would be certainly preferable. But I also think you need to look very clearly at outcomes. Putting money into something is important, but you need to make sure that money comes with decent outcomes. There also needs to be transparency in the funding model, and also a requirement for the states not to use any additional funding in education as an excuse to back away from their funding commitments or their funding obligations. So we'll look at it. It's certainly less contentious than the higher education package from our point of view. I think it'll get through in some form, and I've got to say that if Malcolm Turnbull happens to win the next election, if you believe Newspoll, he won't at this stage, the turning point, I think, will be the political masterstroke of enlisting David Gonski to back your education policy, given that, in a sense, it was branded as Gonski, ironically, by the ALP and the education unions, because it was linked to him and his name. So pretty clever politics on the part of the coalition.
If you read the Financial Review and on Friday, so every second Friday in the inside back cover, there's a column by me. You'll find tomorrow I'm writing about this exact subject. My view is the funding for schools. Well, the government's proposal is a slight improvement in terms of the formula. It could be a great deal better. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but what they do is for the independent schools or non-government schools, they collect the addresses of the parents and then determine the socio-economic status of the school based on the addresses of where the parents come from. It's an extremely crude, very poor system, and it could be vastly improved. And all they would have to do, in fact, is get the tax file numbers of the parents given to the ATO, and the ATO could work out the true SES of the schools. In my ideal world, we wouldn't even go that far. What we would do is assign vouchers to the kids based on the SES of the parents and any special needs, or they're disabled or remote or something like that. And that would then go to the schools, and the schools would be paid on the basis of the vouchers. But that's a fair way from where we are at the moment. Will I vote for the government's package? That is an interesting question. on the face of it, in pure simple terms, I wouldn't, because it involves an additional $2-point-something billion in expenditure. In the 6 months leading up to the budget, the Minister, Simon Birmingham, went around saying money is not the answer. We've had substantially increased funding of education for the last decade, and education standards have been falling. It's time to think about what we're getting for our money rather than throw more money at it, and I think that's eminently logical. Now, all of a sudden he stopped saying that, he's going to throw more money at it. It's obviously for political reasons. So, on the simple face of it, I won't vote for any extra spending. We've got a budget crisis, I think. We've got a debt that's $600 billion heading to $700 billion. We've got a deficit that, this year we're going to get rid of it in 4 years. Last year we were going to get rid of it in 4 years. The year before that we were going to get rid of it in 4 years. It's just putting stuff on the credit card forever is just not an option. So the other thing I would add to that is that I am asking the education bureaucracy for some additional information on aspects surrounding the package, and that may determine where my vote lands. But as it stands at the moment, additional funding I don't think can be justified.
The other big item is the question of the hike in the Medicare levy to help fund the NDIS. Senator Leyonhjelm, do I presume, because you don't like tax rises, that this is a no for you?
Yeah, that's a short answer. The answer is no.
We're looking through the detail of how this would work, but from at first blush, we are concerned at the idea of just a flat rate. We think that if we were to increase it, then it needs to be on some kind of progression, as with other types of taxes,
But isn't it progressive because it's 5%, not a dollar figure?
Yes, but that's across the board, and what happens if the government decides to increase that everyone gets an increased flat rate? So we're looking at the detail, Lyndal, and we haven't landed on it as yet, but we are also concerned about making sure that the NDIS is funded properly, and that it's not used as a political plaything. These are some of the most vulnerable people in our community, and all you need to do is turn on Question Time and just see how people in wheelchairs are being, used as political fodder. I think it's revolting, actually, and we should all just work out how to fund it properly, get it done, and stop playing with people's lives.
So we're still considering our position in terms of whether the Medicare levy should be cut in at a higher income. But one thing that does concern me is what someone quite senior in the disability sector told me the other day, and they said that the way the NDIS is going at the moment, in terms of the way it's being run and administered and rolled out, it could end up being a cautionary tale for the rest of the world on how not to do it. Now, that concerns me. We need to make sure that the whole concept of the NDIS, no less than the Productivity Commission, said that this will unlock the human and economic potential of people who have disabilities and their families, and it's a very worthy goal, and it's a project that must be done properly. But if there are some in the disability sector saying that this is turning into a nightmare, we need to be very mindful of that. Otherwise, money will be wasted and not going to the people who need it most.
Just to reinforce what Nick said, I agree. I mean, I haven't met anybody who doesn't have tremendous compassion for disabled, but the NDIS has the makings of a massive trough with every snout you can imagine poking into it. I'm very concerned that it doesn't end up like that.
Now, we will open up for questions from participants. While you're thinking of a question, remember, raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. I will ask one broader question, because part of the role of CEDA is to not only seek improved public policy but improved political discourse. Are you concerned, have you been concerned by what has seemed like a much more partisan, much more hard-fought and much more focused on politics and policy state of discussion in the last few years in politics? Senator Xenophon?
Look, I think even though at a personal level I get on perfectly fine with him, I think that the benchmark was set in part by Tony Abbott as opposition leader. He was the consummate opposition leader. He would not give the Gillard government a break, ruthlessly exploited every weakness, every opportunity to score a point against the then Gillard government, swept to victory in 2013. And then I think that, he crashed and burned. But as Sarah said, but I think the opposition has learnt from Tony Abbott. Why should we give them a break? The sort of consensus that you saw in the 1980s, 1990s during the Hawke Keating period, when John Howard was opposition leader for a while, where they would get through some big reforms through, that won't happen. It is much more partisan. I don't think it's a good thing. And I do want to mention one thing. I am going to swear, just to sort of make the point how I know David does all the time. I try not to in public. We're in deep shit in this country over energy policy. I've seen a number of businesses in recent weeks who tell me their gas bills are going to double. We're talking about tens of millions going up in the many millions of dollars. We will see a tsunami of job losses in this country in manufacturing in the coming 12 to 18 months. The impact on our economy will be profound. It's a consequence of a failure of a bipartisan energy policy, a failure of a policy that has led to a failure of investment, and a whole range of policy decisions. We've made some serious mistakes. The proof's in the pudding. Gas prices are going to at least double. Electricity prices in the eastern seaboard will go up 20 to 30% for consumers and across the board from July the 1st. It's going to be an absolute job killer. And I still can't believe that people haven't, got together at a bipartisan basis to sort this out. Because, make no mistake, you will be seeing tens and tens of thousands of jobs that will be lost with those sorts of increases in the gas price.
The original question is around, whether things are hyper-partisan, I guess, and any more than regularly. Perhaps, but I also think the public is and the voters are getting sick and tired of that as well. We do it to our peril. I remember this time last year in the midst of the 2016 election, and we kept hearing politicians and political commentators saying, "Oh, no one's engaged. No one's listening. No one cares about the election," as if it was the voters' fault that they were not engaged. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, but what are we offering these people? How are we engaging people? I do think we need a bit of a rethink about participatory democracy and how we engage with people in a much more real sense. I think the advantage that we have in Australia is we can see what's happened in the UK in terms of Brexit and with Trump's election in the US, and people are angry. They've been told for a long time myths about trickle-down economics. They've been told life was going to get better. There's been a massive growth of inequality, and people are looking over their shoulder and they can see other people doing pretty well, and they're feeling that life is pretty tough. And politicians from all sides and consistently for the last couple of decades have just been saying, "Oh no, it'll get better, don't worry, that's not going to happen to you." We haven't been upfront with people about the changing nature of work and the economy, and I think Nick makes a really good point about the manufacturing sector. And unless we have some truth bombs dropped, I think the public is just looking at politicians and saying, well, you know what, you're spinning and that's it. So I think the three of us and our colleagues on the broader crossbench are in a good position to drop those truth bombs when it seems that both the Labor and the Liberal parties are too afraid to.
So your question was, is the debate more partisan, more frenetic? And I, to some extent, I agree with Nick that that process began with Tony Abbott as opposition leader, never gave the then Labor government an inch. And that process is now continuing with the Labor opposition not giving the coalition government an inch, to the point where when the government adopts Labor's policies, Labor still opposes them. And the explanation for that is, of course, that they're both competing to sit on the government benches, and they're very close in the polls. Labor believes they can win the next election. They came close to winning the last one. The Liberals don't want to lose the next election. They came close to losing the last one. And that has an influence on policy. That has an influence on what governments say and what oppositions say. And we see that in the last budget. You just heard Scott try to put lipstick on a pig. It wasn't a Liberal Party budget by a long way. It was a Labor Party budget. And why did they bring a Labor Party budget? They don't believe in most of what they're saying because they want to survive politically. And in that context, when it's a very even fight, things get a bit frantic.
I'll throw open if anyone from the audience has got a question. Someone with their hand up the back.
Senators, thank you for your time. Steph Elliott from QBE Insurance. Just a general question. What's your view on whether the government is doing enough to support small, medium and large businesses?
Well, my answer to that is no, not enough. The small and medium businesses in particular are huge employers, and the best way to help people really is to help them get a job. Once they've got a job, then they're on the way of economic independence and happy life, I suppose, to summarise it. So what would be the sort of things that would help that to occur? Lower taxes, less regulation. It's the same old stick that I keep hammering all the time. Less regulation, lower taxes, get out of their way, let them get on with doing what they do, and don't throw rocks in their path. And I am chair, as Nick said, of the Red Tape Committee. We had a smorgasbord of issues to consider. How do we narrow it down to the point where we can rationally approach the subject of red tape? It's just a massive, great pile of it. We are a highly taxed, highly regulated society, and as a consequence, the barriers to business are enormous.
I think the government's doing a pretty good job at looking after big business. I'm not sure they're doing such a good job looking after small and medium businesses. I take a different view than Senator Leyonhjelm on this. I think lower taxes and less regulation is exactly what larger businesses want to continue getting larger at the expense of small business. And I think that's the way it's been for a long time. When we talk about how small businesses being the biggest employers of Australians across the country, that only ever gets kind of mentioned by the Treasurer in passing. It's not something that is constantly at the front of mind, particularly come budget time. And it comes down to how things work in this building. The influence that is wielded in this building is by the people who have the money and the dosh to hire lobbyists and spend time walking the corridors of Parliament. If you're running a small business, you're not going to have time to get on a plane and fly to Canberra, and why would you? Or even to go in and visit your local MP back home in the electorate. I think the level of political influence from large corporate Australia and the multinationals continues to grow in this country, and the push for tax cuts for those companies over 50 million turnover, I mean, that just proves it in my book. We have to actually have priorities when we come to the budget. David mentioned before budget crisis. Well, yeah, okay, so why are we giving $65 billion worth of tax cuts to a bunch of people who don't actually need them? It does come down to priorities. Small business, I think, has been forgotten for far too long. And if we talk about innovation, we talk about the changing nature of work, which is happening. It's not that it's in the future, it's actually happening now. And we don't have government really engaging on that very practical level. From my perspective of looking after both education and young people, I think there is such amazing things and such an opportunity to engage small business in tackling youth unemployment, and we just don't have those groups talking to each other. And even from a government perspective, you never hear those groups talked about in one sentence as part of an innovation plan.
At the risk of sounding monomaniacal, I will just go back to the issue of energy costs, because at the next CEDA conference, if the energy crisis isn't brought to under some control, and that we do something about those spiralling gas prices, then you will be dealing with a recession. We'll be dealing with massive job losses. We'll be dealing with businesses packing up and leaving our shores, and a lot of businesses won't talk about it publicly, although you've seen it from the front page of the Fin, Glencore and other companies just in yesterday's Financial Review were talking about shutting down a copper plant, energy intensive, with 2,000 employees because of energy costs. If you don't fix that, we will have an Argentinian moment. And 100 years ago, Argentina and Australia were two of the richest countries in the world. Argentina went down a path of very bad policy decisions, bad governments, and slid into penury. Still hasn't recovered from that. We will go down that path unless we sort out our energy crisis in the coming months, because we will scar our economy quite profoundly with the departure of manufacturing. And these manufacturers don't want to speak out publicly because they don't want to impact, they don't want their bankers knocking on their doors saying, "Oi, we've lent, we're going to call your loans in," particularly private companies. But believe me, there are billions of dollars worth of investment that will become stranded assets because they cannot afford to run their plants with gas prices doubling.
Well, we've got you here. Do you have a solution?
Yes, the short answer is there's a whole range of measures. The government agreed to implement some of them, but we need to have a much tougher use it or lose it policy, particularly for the North West Shelf and the Bass Strait. I know some of the big oil companies don't like that, but there's still plenty of gas there that needs to be unleashed. We need to have some government intervention in terms of export controls, which the government will be starting on July the 1st, which I hope will help. We also need to have an emissions intensity scheme. And the great paradox is that Labor opposed it back in 2009, as did the Greens. It was because it was an alternative approach. It was something that I co-sponsored with Malcolm Turnbull when he was opposition leader with Frontier Economics. Now everybody wants an emissions intensity scheme except the coalition, which commissioned the report in the first place. Such is the weird nature of energy politics in this country. Unless you have some certainty in energy politics, policies in this country, you won't get the investment we need to solve the energy crisis.
I think the key thing there is the certainty around a price on carbon. Whatever form that is in, the Greens have said in relation to an EIS, and we stand by this, the devil will be in the detail if and when Labor decide to really detail their policy, or if there was some massive change of heart from Malcolm Turnbull's perspective. But it is the price on carbon that is needed in one form or another.
Any more questions?
I think that's a great segue into the question I was going to ask Mitch Hook. I used to have a bit to do with energy policy, and I'm particularly taken, Senator Hanson-Young, with your request for truth bombs. And I think the elephant in the room about energy policy, and I'd be interested in your comment, is the fact that ideology is triumphing over market solutions.
Yes.
Now, before you brand me as part of the carbon lobby, I personally think we need the trifecta. We need a global protocol. We need a price on carbon. There's got to be a market mechanism. We need breakthrough technologies, and those technology choices, again, should be driven by the market. But what have we got? We've got a crazy situation where we've got state governments regulating and intervening in the market, putting a moratorium on gas, conventional and unconventional gas exploration. We've got a crazy renewable energy target scheme, which is a poor infant industry assistance mechanism. It's a very high cost, inefficient abatement measure, and yet it is adding massive amounts of costs to the prices of energy that you're talking about. So it's actually a very simple solution, and that is you only intervene when there's a market failure. You let the market rip, and you take away these subsidies. Josh Frydenberg yesterday told us there's a 5-fold increase in investment in renewables. Well, no kidding, Sherlock. That's where investment goes when you've got the feather bed of protection.
Senator Leyonhjelm, let the market rip.
Yeah, I mean, where do I start by disagreeing? My view is more supply, take the brakes off. These moratoriums and bans on coal seam gas, you can't even explore for it in Victoria, for God's sake. It's insane. United States has retained, reinvested in its manufacturing industry as a result of having low-cost, readily available gas. They call it shale gas there, but it's only slightly deeper than coal seam gas. And, why are we so smart that we think that we don't need to do that sort of thing? I don't think we should be interfering in contracts that exporters have signed with foreign customers in order to reserve the gas for the domestic market. We should be increasing domestic supply. I do share, though, Nick's concerns about the effect of energy prices on industry and jobs over the next 12 months, 2 years. Even if they started building new power stations tomorrow, they won't come on stream soon enough to prevent high likelihood of blackouts next summer and the summer after that, and probably the summer after that. It's not going to be a good time for a while. Now, I don't think, as Nick also said, the political reality is that it's not being faced up to, it's not being confronted. There is no solution on the horizon because there's an awful lot of ostrich behaviour going on.
Thank you for the question. I think one of the most laughable pushes for government subsidies at the moment is $1 billion for to help Adani build a railway in Queensland. And you talk about letting the market rip. Well, why on earth should the Australian taxpayer be having to put up that kind of money? Let alone the fact that we've got the Queensland government now tying itself in knots in relation to royalty holidays. So, there is inconsistency across the board in relation to this, and I guess that's kind of that's what I'm interpreting from your perspective there. The same in South Australia recently in relation to Jay Weatherall's announcement for an energy plan in SA. Millions of dollars put aside for subsidies for the gas industry. Now, gas prices are as high as they've ever been. They're getting higher because they're pegged to the international market rate. Why on earth we have to spend taxpayer money in South Australia subsidising the gas industry is beyond me. I think it's a waste of money. But I also take heart from the fact that when we look at the energy space, and particularly the renewable energy space, solar and battery storage is becoming very, very competitive. To a point where it is so much more affordable for individuals, small businesses, larger businesses, and I think it's happening already, and it is that kind of disruptive nature of the energy market. I'm a big supporter of making sure we set the rules so that battery storage can play a larger role and have a real value in the market. Set the rules, create a level playing field, and then, yeah, sure. And I would bet that solar, batteries and renewables will take off even bigger, and I think that's a good thing. But I agree with you that government subsidies for industries that don't need it is more like pork barrelling than anything else.
Look, I support solar thermal, and I hope that with the negotiations with the government to get an equity loan to a solar thermal plant in Port Augusta, that will have all sorts of advantages in terms of being virtual baseload. But battery storage won't, in the short to medium term, solve our immediate problems. I despair about the nature of politics in this country. I think that politicians will only come to the party to tackle this head on only once we see mass factory closures, industries leaving the country, and the economy going into recession. I know it sounds pretty bleak, but that's where we're headed, because this economy cannot withstand the sort of price increases we're seeing, and for those companies to remain in this country. And 2 companies I spoke to in the last week, well over 2,000 direct employees between them, few thousand other people in terms of the impact they have on the broader economy. They are saying they cannot, between them, withstand gas increases of $50 million, more than doubling of what they have to pay, without it killing their businesses. And I reckon it seems the major parties will only finally act when we see those mass layoffs and when the economy goes into recession.
But it's not a shortage of gas, Nick. We've got plenty of gas. It's the price. Someone's making a lot of money.
It's a question of supply, and it's a question of the contracts that were signed, and it's a question of whether there ought to be emergency government intervention to deal with it. All I know is I don't want those manufacturing, energy-intensive industries shutting down and leaving us, because if they leave us, if they leave our shores, they won't come back, and the great paradox is they'll go to other countries where the emissions intensity will probably be much higher than it is here in Australia.
We've got time for one final question, and there's a question from this side of the room.
Hi, my name is Rachel Sloper. I'm the Company Secretary for Lutheran Services. We're from Queensland, and we are in the community services and aged care industry, I suppose you would call it. Heard a lot over the last few days about economy, markets, jobs, employment, and interesting to hear you talking about the rollout of the NDIS. And Nick, you're also from the state of South Australia, where there's been a federal inquiry prompted by some catastrophic failures at state-run aged care facilities recently. So I guess where that leaves us in the third sector is saying, well, market mechanisms are useful and we should look to improve them wherever possible. However, there's also a need to reinforce the strength of the community and the relationships that people have with one another, because the market can never replace those things, and they're often, especially in the disability and aged care sector, they offer a lot more strengths than an economic model alone. So I guess my question for you all is, what can government do, either at a philosophical or practical level, really, to encourage more community and less economy?
Can I just answer that very...
Just have quick responses.
Yeah, a 30-second response. The problem at Oakton, which is a scandal, and I and my colleague Sterling Griff brought 6 family members of family members who died at the Oakton facility, some we believe prematurely, and the coroner, the state coroner, hopefully will be looking at those cases of terrible, terrible neglect. We need to have more inclusive institutions. That involves greater transparency and accountability on the part of the Commonwealth with their accreditation mechanism, which I think has failed. It involves empowering residents and their families to get answers. It involves having things such as basically a falls and incidents register, which I think has been lacking in the aged care sector. But to work with the sector, because it is a growing sector, you provide an incredibly valuable service. And I think that unless we have that level of transparency, we'll continue to see failures. And I'm still appalled that the South Australian government is still saying that the ICAC inquiry into Oakton for maladministration ought to be held in secret. And I think that that needs to be held in the open as a matter of urgency.
I think that I mentioned before, I think part of the growing frustration of the electorate with politicians and kind of, I'd probably put in this the idea of kind of the broader corporate Australia sect, is that the community have seen that trickle-down economics is bullshit. It hasn't worked. People have been told that all you need to do is let the market decide, and we'll give subsidies over here to the big players, and it'll work its way down. Tax cuts to big companies, and everyone at the bottom end will be looked after. Well, when you talk about the types of clients that Lutheran Services look after, well, that just doesn't come out in the wash. And I think people are waking up to that. What we have to do is find a way to ensure that those services and those individuals are given a genuine, real value, that it is not just about looking at a budget sheet every May and saying, oh, this is how much money that sector's going to get. The truth is, and South Australia is a good example, where in their changing economy, we actually desperately need more people working in the caring services. We need more people working in those service delivery models of looking after people, connecting with people. But we don't talk about those things as a value to the government, to community, and we need champions for those in this place as much as in out there in the real world. We need to ensure that when the Treasurer stands up on budget night, he talks about the value of what Australians are doing, looking after, caring for each other and contributing to their communities, not just some red or black line or some false debate about good debt versus bad debt.
And Senator Leyonhjelm, last word.
I'll be quick. I think you've got an unrealistic expectation of government. Government in the end is public servants, laws, regulations and courts and people with guns enforcing the laws. The idea that you've got, that government, all that system can create, a caring, loving environment is optimistic at best. That these are matters for civil society, for us as individuals and our interactions with each other. If we as a society decide that aged care is not being handled well, and I think that's a reasonable conclusion, at least to some extent, then we can treat aged people who need looking after and their families as customers and have suppliers of aged care services competing for their business as customers. In the same way we could do that with school education, and we could do that more with patients in healthcare, so that doctors and hospitals and whatnot are competing with for patients on the basis of quality and price, as occurs if they're trying to sell us a car or a pair of shoes or something like that. But to think that government can make us all nice to each other and care and share and all that sort of stuff, you're never going to get that, and I don't think that's what governments can do.
What is the point of government, David?
You tell me. You've probably got a better answer than me.
We might, because we've run out of time, leave it on that note, but I will thank Senators Xenophon, Hanson-Young and Leyonhjelm for caring and sharing with us today. We do appreciate your time, but we'll let you get back to the joy of Senate estimates. Thank you very much.